Love is often hailed as an unstoppable force, an unbreakable bond that triumphs over adversity. But what happens when that love is founded not on truth, but on deception? In this chilling tale, a wedding night, meant to celebrate a joyful union, descends into a nightmare of betrayal, heartbreak, and bloodshed. Set in an idyllic, upscale neighborhood, this tragic story plays out behind the pristine walls of what should have been a perfect celebration. What began as a promise for a lifetime together turns into a brutal revelation of secrets long buried. This is the story of Derek, Leah, and Taryn, three people caught in a web of love, loyalty, and lies. Their lives, once closely connected by friendship and fate, are about to be forever changed by the choices they've made and the truths they've hidden for far too long. At the center of it all is Leah, the radiant bride, glowing with hope. Beside her stands Derek, her seemingly devoted groom. And in the background, yet closer to Derek than anyone realizes, is Taryn, his best friend, his confidant, and the keeper of a devastating secret. Together, these three form a triangle far more complicated than appearances suggest. Derek and Taryn share more than just years of friendship. Their bond runs deeper, rooted in shared history, buried feelings, and unspoken truths. For years, they've navigated their connection in silence, hiding what neither dared name. On the surface, their friendship looked ordinary, loyal, tight-knit, supportive. But behind closed doors, their relationship teetered on the edge of something more, something they both feared and longed for. Leah stepped into their world unaware. She saw two men who clearly cared for one another and interpreted their closeness as a sign of Derek's emotional depth. She admired it. She felt safe in it. What she couldn't see were the glances that lingered just a second too long, the touches loaded with meaning, the silences filled with everything left unsaid. She didn't know what was hidden behind the loyalty she admired so much. As the wedding day crept closer, Derek found himself unraveling. He loved Leah. There was no question about that, but his heart was divided. Something unresolved from his past with Taryn was rising to the surface, demanding attention. And Taryn noticed. He saw the way Derek's smiles faded too quickly, the way his laughter rang hollow. Something inside Derek was breaking, and Taryn knew exactly why. Leah remained blissfully unaware, floating in the euphoria of her upcoming vows, dreaming of a life she thought was built on certainty. But to understand the collapse of that dream, we have to go back, before the engagement, before the wedding, before Leah entered the frame. We return to a quiet evening, ordinary on the surface, but destined to shift everything. Derek and Taryn sat together, as they had many times before. The TV buzzed softly in the background, drinks in hand, a familiar comfort between them. But that night, something felt different. Attention, long denied, pressed down on the room. It wasn't new, it had always been there, but that night, it was undeniable. A glance lingered just a heartbeat too long. A hand brushed a shoulder, not accidentally. Something unspoken passed between them. A permission, a confession. And then, without saying a word, the boundary that had kept their world intact shattered. What followed was not a declaration of love, nor a romantic resolution. It was the beginning of a slow unraveling, of a secret that would one day come crashing down under the weight of truth on the night it was least expected. And that night was the wedding. What followed that fateful night was a whirlwind of confusion, passion, and fear. In a single moment, Derek and Taryn had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They were no longer just friends. They had become something else, something undefined, unspoken, and deeply dangerous. It was a connection that burned bright but had to remain hidden in the shadows. They knew they could never reveal it, not to the world, and especially not to Leah. In the days and weeks that followed, the two men buried their secret deep within. They smiled, laughed, and carried on as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, the truth simmered, threatening to boil over. Each stolen glance, every hushed meeting in private, added to the weight of their deception. It grew heavier with each passing day. Derek found himself torn between two worlds. On one side was the life he had always known, the future he was expected to embrace: marriage, stability, and a picture-perfect family with Leah. On the other side was something far more volatile, a love that consumed him completely, but terrified him just as much. He had caught a glimpse of a life filled with raw, unfiltered emotion, and now he couldn't unsee it. Taryn felt the same. There was guilt, yes, but there was also dread. Not just dread for what they had done, but an even deeper fear of what would happen if the truth were ever exposed. And as the wedding day crept closer, that fear began to infect everything. The tension between Derek and Taryn became impossible to ignore. They tried to pretend, tried to act as if their bond was the same as it had always been. But everything had changed. They both knew it. Derek's emotions swung wildly. One minute euphoric, the next withdrawn and hollow. He threw himself into wedding plans with frantic energy, obsessing over every detail. To the outside world, it looked like commitment. But to those who knew him best, it was a red flag. The cracks were beginning to show. Taryn, in contrast, seemed calm, stoic even. But his stillness masked a storm inside. He was drowning in emotion. Love for Derek, guilt for betraying Leah, jealousy for a life he couldn't claim, and a haunting sense that everything was slipping through his fingers. Leah, lost in her joy, didn't see it. Her days were consumed by bridal checklists. The dress, the venue, the flowers, the guest list. She was dreaming of a fairy tale future, blind to the nightmare unfolding around her. She didn't notice how Derek's smile didn't always reach his eyes, or how his hands trembled slightly when he spoke of the future. She couldn't comprehend the way he would sometimes flinch at her touch, as though her affection reminded him of something, or someone, he was trying to forget. And then there were the subtle, fleeting moments between Derek and Taryn. A shared look held a second too long. A hand brushing an arm with just a little too much familiarity. A whispered word exchanged in a crowded room. Most people missed them. But for those who did notice, something fell off, like a current buzzing under the surface. Taryn was unraveling, too. He was caught between his heart and his conscience, knowing the wedding would mark the end of whatever they had become. Once vows were exchanged, there could be no more secrets. The closer the day came, the more unbearable the silence between them became. Derek began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. He'd stare at the ceiling for hours, tormented by what he was about to do and what he was about to lose. Taryn, still ever present in his life, now felt distant. Their closeness was poisoned by guilt and fear. The space between them grew colder, heavier. Day by day, the pressure mounted. The wedding loomed like a storm on the horizon, ominous, inescapable, and ready to destroy everything in its path. Derek felt trapped in a web of his own making, knowing that no matter which path he chose, someone would be hurt. He just didn't know how badly or how soon. Finally, the day arrived. The day meant for joy, celebration, and new beginnings. As Derek stood at the altar, waiting for Leah to walk toward him, his heart pounded, not with happiness, but with suffocating dread. Each step she took felt like another nail in the coffin of the life he was supposed to want, and a brutal farewell to the truth he could never speak aloud. Taryn stood just a few feet away, positioned as Derek's best man, a title he had worn for years in more ways than one. But today, it felt impossibly heavy. As Derek spoke his vows, his mind was anything but steady. Each word came out flat, lifeless, as though they belonged to someone else. When his eyes met Taryn's, he caught a smile, but it was strained, forced. Beneath it, Derek recognized the pain. The silent heartbreak of watching the man he loved promise his life to someone else. The ceremony unfolded, just as planned. Vows were exchanged, rings slid onto fingers, and the officiant's voice declared them husband and wife. Applause followed. Joy surrounded them. But for Derek, every word and every ceremonial gesture pierced him with a reminder of the truth he'd buried, a truth that could never be spoken, and a love he could never fully claim. At the reception, the room buzzed with celebration. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and guests danced beneath strings of golden lights. But Derek felt none of it. His heart and mind were tangled in a storm of emotions. He was now a husband, bound by vows. Yet a connection far deeper and far more dangerous had begun to unravel him. His hidden relationship with Taryn. Leah, radiant with happiness, remained unaware of the torment simmering within her new husband. But as the evening went on, she began to notice that something wasn't right. Derek's smiles didn't reach his eyes. His laughter came too late or not at all. She tried to explain it away. Perhaps it was just exhaustion from the long day, but a quiet worry stirred inside her. Taryn, too, was fighting a battle behind his calm exterior. Every well-wisher, every toast he raised, felt like a cruel twist of fate. He watched Derek from across the room, each glance exchanged between them sharp with unspoken tension. Their secret hung between them like a storm cloud, invisible to most but impossible for either of them to ignore. For everyone else, the day was a celebration of love and new beginnings. But for Derek and Taryn, it was a bittersweet reminder of what they had shared and what they had to give up. They had played their roles well, kept their distance, and buried the truth. Yet tonight, that facade was cracking under the weight of guilt and longing. As the festivities wound down, Derek's disquiet became more noticeable. Leah could see it now, how he seemed distracted, how his eyes kept drifting across the room instead of settling on her. His responses to her felt clipped, his presence half-hearted. The man who had once been so attentive now seemed distant, emotionally unreachable. In truth, Derek couldn't stop thinking about Taryn. The affair, sudden and all-consuming, had begun in the days leading up to the wedding. What had started as an unplanned moment of vulnerability had spiraled into something neither of them could control. And now, standing at the threshold of a new life with Leah, Derek was drowning in guilt and confusion. He had tried to be the man Leah believed in, the husband she deserved. But no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts kept returning to Taryn. The guilt gnawed at him, the shame of deceiving Leah, the anguish of denying his own truth. It was all becoming too much to bear. Taryn, meanwhile, was barely holding it together. The affair had been brief, but intense, an emotional explosion that had left them both reeling. Watching Derek with Leah tonight was agony. Every smile they shared, every affectionate touch, cut Taryn deeper. He saw the struggle in Derek's eyes, the way he avoided Leah's gaze, the way his attention always found its way back to him. As the evening ended, Derek and Leah retreated to their bridal suite. Leah, glowing with joy, looked forward to a romantic night with her new husband. But Derek couldn't bring himself to connect. The thought of intimacy felt wrong, like a betrayal, not just of Leah, but of the part of himself he was still trying to silence. Taryn made an excuse, claiming exhaustion from the long day, that the stress of the wedding had finally caught up with him. Leah, though clearly disappointed, nodded in quiet acceptance. She kissed him goodnight, doing her best to be understanding, but the seed of doubt had already taken root in her mind. Something didn't feel right. Derek lay beside her, wide awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. His mind churned with guilt, confusion, and the weight of truths he couldn't speak aloud. He knew he was hurting Leah. She deserved love, real love, undivided attention, honesty. And he couldn't give her that. Not completely. Not when his heart was still entangled in something he couldn't fully comprehend. The guilt, the fear, the love he felt for Taryn, it was all too much. Sleep wouldn't come. His thoughts were too loud, crashing over him like waves in a storm. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, Derek made a decision. He needed to see Taryn, to talk, to try and make sense of the chaos they had created. Maybe, just maybe, if they spoke openly, he could find a sliver of peace, some clarity, some direction. Quietly, carefully, he slipped out of bed, doing everything he could not to wake Leah. The hotel hallways were dim and hushed, the kind of silence that magnifies every footstep. His heart pounded, not with excitement but with dread. As he walked toward Taryn's room, his chest tightened. Each step felt heavier, as if his body itself was reluctant, warning him not to go. Finally, he reached the door and knocked. A long pause followed, agonizing in its length, before it slowly creaked open. Taryn stood there, dressed only in his underwear, eyes shadowed with the same storm Derek carried in his own. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. They both knew why Derek had come. Derek stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded far too final. They sat, the silence between them thick and tense, loaded with things unsaid. Derek tried to speak, to explain, to confess, to discuss how they could move forward without destroying everything. But the words refused to come. His throat was dry. His thoughts tangled. After what felt like an eternity, Derek finally broke the silence. He admitted what he had tried for so long to deny, that he loved Taryn, that he couldn't move forward with Leah while his heart still belonged to someone else, that he didn't know how to live two lives, how to lie every single day. Then he asked the question that had haunted him since the beginning. What are we supposed to do now? Taryn didn't answer, not with words, but the emotion in his eyes said everything. The pain, the longing, the fear. And then, all at once, the dam broke. The emotions that had been building for weeks, the pressure of pretending, the heartbreak, the guilt, it all erupted. They reached for each other in desperation, not out of lust, but out of need to feel something real. In a moment of weakness, they gave in. What followed wasn't romantic. It wasn't beautiful. It was messy, raw, painful. The affair that had begun just days ago reignited in the dim quiet of Taryn's room, both of them fully aware of the cost. But neither could stop. It was a final, frantic grasp at something they already knew they would have to let go. And just as quickly as it started, it ended. Derek sat back, breathless, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him like a boulder. His mind spun with thoughts of Leah, of the vows he had spoken only hours before, of the future he had promised her but was no longer sure he could give. The guilt was suffocating. He moved to the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to understand how everything had spiraled so far out of control. Taryn, beside him, was equally silent, haunted by the truth. They had crossed a line they could never uncross. The night, which had begun with celebration and possibility, had ended in betrayal and despair. There would be no easy way forward, no resolution that wouldn't break something or someone. Meanwhile, back in the bridal suite, Leah stirred in her sleep. Reaching for Derek in the dark, her hand landed on the cold, empty space beside her. And in that small moment, something in her heart shifted. Leah jolted awake, her breath catching in her throat as panic flooded her senses. Her hand instinctively reached across the bed, cold sheets. Derek wasn't there. She sat up, calling his name into the dim room, her voice shaky with fear. No answer. Silence pressed in around her, thick and unsettling. She threw back the covers and grabbed her robe, slipping it on in haste. The hallway outside was silent, the soft pad of her bare feet echoing faintly against the carpeted floor. The stillness only amplified the unease building inside her. With each step, her heart beat faster. Her mind spun through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Something wasn't right. Some unseen instinct guided her to a door down the hall, Taryn's room. She stopped outside, a knot twisting tightly in her stomach. Her hand hovered in the air. She knocked once, softly. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Dread crept up her spine. She knocked a third time, now frantic fists pounding against the wood. Then, finally, the door opened. Taryn stood there, eyes wide and panicked, dressed in nothing but his underwear. The expression on his face was enough. He didn't have to say a word. Leah's gaze drifted past him into the room, where Derek sat on the edge of the bed, his face pale, eyes heavy with shame. That was all she needed. The truth, unspoken for so long, was now violently, undeniably exposed. The man she had just married, the man she thought she knew, the man who had promised her forever, had betrayed her in the most intimate, unforgivable way. Everything inside her collapsed at once. Her world, her marriage, her future. It all came crashing down. Leah stood frozen, her body numb, her mind struggling to comprehend what her eyes had already confirmed. Taryn's guilt, Derek's devastation. It was all there, painted across their faces. The betrayal hit her like a tidal wave, drowning her in humiliation, fury, and heartbreak. Her voice came out trembling, sharp like broken glass, demanding answers that no one seemed able to give. Derek stammered, desperate to speak, but no words could mend what had been torn apart. Taryn stood motionless, caught between the man he loved and the consequences of their choices, unable to stop the unraveling. Leah's anger erupted. Her hands shook violently as she pointed at Derek, her voice rising into hysteria. Each word she hurled felt like it burned her throat. She had given him everything, her trust, her love, her future, and he had thrown it away. The pain twisted into rage. Her hands, once trembling, became fists. Her breath came in shallow, furious bursts. And then, without warning, she lunged at him. The room exploded into chaos. Derek tried to calm her, tried to hold her back, but she was beyond reason. Her fury was volcanic, scorching everything in its path. Taryn looked on helplessly, torn between the love he couldn't deny and the horror of what was unraveling before him. The fragile facade they had all tried to maintain had shattered. The confrontation spiraled, escalating faster than any of them could control. And then, everything changed. Overcome with emotion, Leah grabbed the nearest object she could find, a heavy decorative lamp from the nightstand. In one sweeping motion, fueled by a blinding storm of grief and rage, she swung it. The sound of impact was deafening. Derek collapsed instantly, the blow sending him to the floor in a heap. Blood pooled around him with terrifying speed. For one horrible, suspended second, the room went silent. Time seemed to stop. Taryn rushed to Derek's side, panic overtaking him as he tried to stop the bleeding, his hands slippery and shaking. But the damage was done. Derek's lifeless eyes stared up at him, empty and still. The reality hit Taryn like a freight train. Derek was gone. Leah stood motionless, the weight of her actions sinking in slowly, agonizingly. But her rage hadn't faded, not yet. Her grief curdled into something dark and dangerous. She turned on Taryn, eyes wild with fury. She blamed him for everything, for stealing her future, for poisoning her marriage, for the agony now roaring in her chest. Her pain, her betrayal, her shattered dreams all collided in a single explosive moment. Before she could stop herself, she lashed out again, hands trembling, not with fear, but with the desperate, chaotic need to end the nightmare. Taryn, caught off guard, had barely a moment to react before Leah's attack struck him. The room spiraled into chaos, a whirlwind of grief and fury. Leah's screams and sobs filled the air, colliding with Taryn's desperate pleas, his voice trembling with fear, trying to stop the inevitable as it unfolded before him. But it was already too late. The second blow landed hard, dropping him beside Derek. Their blood mingled on the cold, merciless floor, 2 lives extinguished in the span of seconds. Then came silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that wrapped itself around the room like a noose, a silence that screamed louder than any cry. Leah stood frozen in the center, her chest heaving, gasping for breath. Her robe clung to her like a shroud as the reality of what she had done settled around her like falling ash. The lamp slipped from her fingers and crashed to the floor beside the 2 bodies, one her husband, the other his best friend. She stared down, numb, eyes darting between their still forms. Derek, Taryn, gone. The weight of her actions struck her like a punch to the chest, stealing the air from her lungs. Trembling, she fell to her knees, crawling toward Derek, her fingers reaching out to touch him, to shake him, to beg him to wake up. As if this were just a nightmare she could shake herself out of. But Derek didn't move. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, his face eerily peaceful in death. And then the horror consumed her. A wail escaped her lips, loud, primal, desperate. It was the sound of a soul breaking in half. She clutched Derek's lifeless hand, tears pouring from her eyes, her sobs echoing off the walls. She wanted to take it back. She wanted to rewind time. But there was no undoing what had just happened. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her heart, was dead, by her own hands, in a moment of blinding rage. Taryn's body lay beside him, twisted slightly, his expression frozen in a mix of shock and sorrow. His presence, once comforting, now unbearable, served as another reminder of the betrayal, the tangled love triangle, and the irreversible decisions that had shattered them all. Leah's thoughts spun violently in her mind, colliding with fear, regret, and a sickening sense of disbelief. She looked around the room, frantic, desperate for an escape, for some way to erase the scene in front of her. But the blood was everywhere, on her hands, on the floor, spattered against the walls. It clung to her skin, her soul. It was too real, too final. She tried to clean it, scrubbing at the stains with shaking hands, whispering apologies through her tears, but the blood wouldn't come off. It smeared, spread, resisted every attempt to erase it. Her sobs deepened as the futility of it all took hold. The room, which had just hours earlier been filled with the promise of a new life, now reeked of death and despair. Exhausted, drained, and broken, Leah collapsed beside them. Her body convulsed with sobs, arms wrapped around herself as if she could hold her soul together. But there was nothing left. The love she once clung to had shattered, twisted into something unrecognizable, leaving only devastation in its wake. She was alone, truly, completely alone. No Derek, no Taryn, no future. Only the echo of her screams, the echo of blood on tile, and the unbearable silence that followed. The weight of what she had done sat heavy on her chest like a stone. She had destroyed everything. Her love, her marriage, her sanity. And now, only one question remained. What now? As the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, casting soft golden hues across the ruined room, Leah knew there was no going back. Whether she fled or turned herself in, it no longer mattered. Nothing could bring them back. Her life, once filled with laughter, warmth, and dreams, was now reduced to ashes. A single night, a single act, had rewritten everything. What was meant to be a celebration of love and new beginnings had turned into a harrowing tale of betrayal, violence, and death. The wedding, once a symbol of hope and unity, now lay in ruins, its vows drowned in secrets and blood. The empty venue echoed with silence, a haunting reminder of what was lost. And there, in the aftermath, sat Leah, the bride who had dreamed of forever, now stained by heartbreak, by guilt, and by the irreversible choice that changed everything. This was the night love died, that we are left to wrestle with the deeper implications of this tragic tale. Derek, Taryn, and Leah were all victims, not just of each other, but of the weight of expectations, hidden desires, and a world that demanded silence over truth. Their secrets, buried beneath shame and fear, didn't stay hidden. They became the spark that ignited everything. What does this story reveal about us, about the human condition? It challenges how we navigate love, loyalty, and identity in a society that often asks us to choose between who we truly are and who we're supposed to be. The wedding rings, once gleaming symbols of unity, now lie broken and discarded, hollow representations of a bond that was never fully real. And there, in the wreckage, stands Leah, alone, isolated, confronting the devastating consequences of a single night fueled by betrayal, heartbreak, and rage. Her pain, as unbearable as it is, forces us to confront the dangers of suppressed truths and the destruction that can follow when we deny ourselves and each other the honesty we deserve. This isn't just a story of one failed love triangle. It's a cautionary tale about the cost of betrayal, the burden of secrets, and the toll of living a life that isn't truly ours. The events of that night serve as a powerful reminder of how swiftly love can sour, and how fragile trust becomes when it's built on lies. As the screen fades to black, we're left with one haunting question. In a world where truth is so often buried beneath layers of fear and performance, what is the true price of living a lie? And when that truth finally comes to light, who pays? This is a story of love lost, trust destroyed, and lives forever altered. A story that echoes long after the final word. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more.